Why?
Why?
If you have T-Mobile 5G home internet, you might be hearing this
Why?
a lot.
Why?
Every time your internet slows down during the busiest hours.
Why?
Why?
Because your network gives priority to cell phone users.
Why?
Good question. Why not switch to Cox Internet with 2 times faster download speeds than T-Mobile 5G home internet during peak hours?
Okay.
Stop the whys and visit cox.com/5G home for details. T-Mobile prioritizes certain T-Mobile phone users over home internet users during times of congestion.
Welcome to Nomad Entrepreneur, the podcast for digital nomads and remote working entrepreneurs who are living life on their own terms. I'm your host and fellow nomad, Daniel Faunigbe, and I'm excited to bring you conversations with inspiring individuals who are building businesses from anywhere in the world. Each episode will dive into their stories, tips, and strategies for creating a successful and fulfilling location-independent lifestyles. So grab your headphones, kick back, and join me as I explore the freedom and adventure of the nomadic life. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to another episode of Nomad Entrepreneur. As you may have noticed, the name of this podcast has changed for the last 1 or 2 episodes now. And the reason for that is because, as you guessed, things change, people change, times change, and circumstances change, and the direction that I want to take this podcast has definitely changed as well. As a digital nomad and someone who enjoys traveling and working remotely, I dabble into entrepreneurship. I've always dabbled into entrepreneurship for the last 5, 6, 7 years, and one of the things that I enjoy talking about is the freedom of being able to travel and make money while doing that at the same time. And I just want to expand this platform more to talking to people who do these things that I do, who travel, run a business, or maybe even work remotely. This is not just open to people who are building businesses. It may be that you work remotely and are building a business. It may not necessarily be your business, but this is just a platform for anyone who wants to share their stories and tips, strategies on how to sustainably travel while making money. Because as someone who has at some point ran out of money really trying to travel, not as a result of a lack of planning, but because life just happens and you just don't plan for everything. I know that, as a matter of fact, that situation is kind of gross. It's not the same situation that you want to find yourself in. But as I've grown more, as I've learned more, and be more aware of my situation and put more effort into making money or just becoming more financially independent, I've seen the difference between traveling as someone who's financially capable and someone who's not so financially capable, and the freedom that comes with the latter. So that's what I want to share with you with this podcast, and I hope that it still resonates with you. Of course, I'm still going to be bringing people, sharing their stories about travel and just inspiring you to do the same if you're not doing it presently right now. So that is the story behind the name change for this podcast. And you might be hearing some sounds in the background. I'm in Mexico City. I could have cleaned it up in post, but I'm deciding to leave some of this background chatter or some of the honks that you might hear later on in the episode. But I just wanted to experience what I am experiencing right now, being in Mexico City as a digital nomad, and just get to feel it the same way that I'm feeling it right now. Even though I'm on the 8th floor, it still doesn't change the fact that Mexico City is one of the loudest cities in the world. Anyways, with that said, in this episode we'll be talking about digital nomads, why they're not created the same, why some digital nomads are just a marketing play by countries, just to get on the bandwagon and say, hey, look at us, we have a digital nomad visa as well. And also, we'll be talking about why Rio de Janeiro is the most sought after destination in South America, or one of the most sought after destinations, I should say, that the digital nomad visa requirement and some of the upsides, and also why Mexico may not be as cheap as it was before, and what other options are out there. So Stick around till the very end, and also don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever it is you get your podcast from. Also, if you have any thoughts or if you enjoy this podcast as much as I've been told that some people do, don't hesitate to leave a rating, and that just helps to push the podcast to a lot more people who are traveling and living a life of freedom and adventure all over the world. So without further ado, let's get right into the podcast, and I will see you on the other side. So the first thing I really want to discuss here are nomad visas and why they are not created the same. And a case in point in this topic that I really want to bring to attention is the Colombia digital nomad visas, for example. It's been around now for quite a while, just like with every country out there. And one of the requirements of the Colombia digital nomad visa, of course, it's the most attractive of the bunch out there, and it's that you should be making at least $700 a month, which is the lowest of most of the digital nomad visas out there. And this has gotten a lot of people, hype. Many people are like, you know what, I think I can make $700 a month. That shouldn't be an issue. But what I find quite disappointing is the fact that the Colombia digital nomad visa, even though it carries the term digital nomad visa, is not quite open to everyone as it should be, or as many digital nomad visas out there. Who's eligible for the Colombia digital nomad visa? So you will only be eligible for the Colombia digital nomad visa if you are from one of the countries that are visa exempt initially for the Colombia regular visa. Meaning that if your country requires a visa to enter Colombia, then you are automatically not qualified to apply for the Colombia digital nomad visa. The countries that are, just naturally eligible for the Colombian nomad visa are the countries that already do not require visa to go to the country. For example, the United States, most of the Schengen countries, most of the EU countries, Canada. So essentially, Colombia is telling us that if you're not from any of these countries, you're not eligible for the Colombia digital nomad visa, which defeats the purpose of the Colombia digital nomad visa. Whole purpose of the digital nomad visa is to allow people from different countries who are able to work remotely to be able to visit countries and live there for a set period of time and be able to carry out their normal business activities as they would back in their home country. So I find this very disappointing because, it further goes to assert the fact that digital nomad visas are not what they claim to be. At least for a lot of the digital nomad visas out there, there's still a lot of discrimination and a lot of you're not allowed here, if I can put it that way, going on when it comes to digital nomad visa. There's a lot of cookie-cutter approach to eligibility and issuance of this visa. So if you are looking for, digital nomad visas out there, just keep this in mind. If you require a visa to enter Colombia, originally you're not eligible to apply for digital nomad visa, even if you make the minimum required amount, which is about $700 a month. Now, what are some other options out there if you are looking for a digital nomad visa? There's so many countries, coming up with digital nomad visas now. In the EU, there's Hungary, there's Croatia, there's Greece, there's Malta, there's Cyprus. A lot of these countries, require you to make significantly more. Portugal, I believe, is still one of the cheapest out there at about 2,400 euros a month. And countries like, Greece, Croatia, Malta, Hungary require you to make a lot more. At least they allow everybody to come into the country, unlike Colombia. So if you're a digital nomad looking for digital nomad visas, these are some of the countries I would consider. I wouldn't consider Colombia at all. Even if I meet the eligibility, I don't think I would be inspired enough to apply, because it only allows you to, stay in the country for 6 months at a time, which honestly to me doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyways, that is my thoughts on that. And now let's go over to why Rio de Janeiro is the most sought after destination in South America, and what are the digital nomad visa requirements, and what are some of the upsides of applying for a digital nomad visa in Rio de Janeiro. Now, if you're looking for sunshine all year round, if you're looking for great outdoors, affordable cost of living, and a lot of other benefits that Brazil offers, Rio de Janeiro is that city for you. And the good thing about Rio de Janeiro, or about Brazil in general, is that they have a digital nomad visa for anyone who wants to go live in Brazil. So the Nomad visa lasts for 1 year with another option to renew for another year. And as an applicant, you must provide proof of work and earn at least $1,500 a month, which I think should be pretty attainable for most digital nomad visa. I mean, if you're not earning $1,500 a month, I think you should, get on your hustle a little bit more, make more money so you can be eligible for even the most affordable of digital nomad visas. So you will have the benefit of thriving within a digital nomad community. Brazil has that established nomad community, especially Rio de Janeiro. And, there are a lot of work amenities according to the research I've done online. I haven't been to Brazil myself, but I have heard a lot of good things from, brothers and, other digital nomads living in Brazil. Rio de Janeiro is still, very affordable compared to most European and American metropolitan cities. And it's one of those cities that offers a lot of value for money. And I will link the article down in the show notes if you want to read more about it. It's an article from bbc.com, just chronicling some of the benefits of living in Rio de Janeiro, some of the advantages of living there, and of course a lot of beautiful images as well. So if you are looking to read that article, it's going to be in the show notes down below. I think personally one of the cons of applying for the Brazilian digital nomad visa is, of course, you need to be living in Brazil. And obviously speaking Portuguese might be one of the toughest things that you might have to do. But if you speak Spanish, chances are you already learned 60 to 70% of the Portuguese vocabulary anyway, and you just have to, like anybody else, maybe take some extra classes and just immerse yourself in the culture and brush up on your skill. But for someone like me who has, I would say, subpar knowledge of Spanish, it's going to be super challenging to throw myself into the Brazilian culture. And if I want to do something like that, if you're listening and want to do something like that as well, I would recommend that you pick up some Portuguese, learn the language a little bit so that you can have a good time living in Brazil. Now let's talk about why Mexico may not be as cheap as it once was before. So I put a tweet out just a moment ago, and it's getting a lot of traction. I think a lot of people it just resonates with a lot of people. Mexico is not as cheap as it once was again. And I talked about this as well in my in one of my YouTube videos. I'll leave that in the show notes as well. And the thing with Mexico is that a lot of people, or there's been a lot of misconception about Mexico, or a lot of misinformation, especially very recently, about people talking about how Mexico might be, the cheapest destination if you are looking to retire or if you're looking to start your digital nomad journey. I have talked about it as well. I mean, this was an opinion that I held, somewhere about 2 years ago. But having spent time in Mexico, a lot in the last 1 year, I've realized that things are not as they once was. I mean, thinking about how much I spend now in accommodation, it's much more expensive. I mean, slightly more expensive than what I would spend about 2 years ago. And if you're coming here right now and if you go look on Airbnb, hardly would you find a 1-bedroom apartment for under $1,000. It's just impossible. Even shared accommodation right now, goes anywhere from, $800. You can find a shared accommodation for $1,200, which I think is a far cry from what it used to be. And right now, if you love Mexico City like I do, it's going to be hard to find, it's going to be pretty tough to get by with under $2,000 a month. And that is just the reality of things. Of course, that does not mean that there are not other places that you can go to that can live in Mexico for under $2,000 a month. But realistically, if you want to, have a very solid quality of life as an entrepreneur who wants to get work done and have a focused and balanced lifestyle, a lot of the cities that you might be looking at may not be affordable at $2,000 a month. So you need to keep this in mind before coming to Mexico City. Things like food and going out, they still are relatively the same as they once were, but basic things, or the things that take the most out of your budget, like accommodation, transportation, and just like basic essentials for your day-to-day life is not going to be as cheap as as before. So if you're looking to live in Mexico right now, you will be looking to at least have $2,500 to $3,000 a month, just to have a decent quality of life in Mexico City. And that's just the way it is. I always say that developing countries are not going to stay developed forever. They will become developed, and underdeveloped countries will, end up becoming developing countries at some point. So that's just a cycle of life. As more people, transition into remote work and, start traveling and realizing that there's more value to be had in a lot of these countries, prices are going to go up. So if you are thinking about starting a digital nomad journey right now, I would say this is the best time to start. This is what I have for you in today's episode of the Nomad Entrepreneur podcast. If you find any of this information helpful, consider subscribing to this podcast wherever you get your podcast from. And also, if you have any questions, reach out to me at ifdaniel@gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. And also, if you want to be a long-term supporter of the podcast, this is how you can reach me, at least for now. I appreciate you listening again. Go into the show notes for any of the links to some of the articles that I mentioned. And also, if you want to check out some of the tools that I use to travel effectively as a digital nomad, it's going to be in the show notes as well. My name is Daniel, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Take care now. Bye.
Why?
If you have T-Mobile 5G home internet, you might be hearing this
Why?
a lot.
Why?
Every time your internet slows down during the busiest hours.
Why?
Because your network gives priority to cell phone users.
Why?
Good question. Why not switch to Cox Internet with 2 times faster download speeds than T-Mobile 5G home internet during peak hours?
Okay.
Stop the whys and visit cox.com/5G home for details. T-Mobile prioritizes certain T-Mobile phone users over home internet users during times of congestion.
Vive la acción, el drama, el as featuring meal. Escoge entre un QPC Big Mac o McNuggets de 10 piezas para acompañar unas papitas medianas, sweet and sour sauce y una bebida. En carteleras ahora. Para pa. En McDonald's participantes por tiempo limitado.